Welcome to an example in which we're solving this kind of an equation. So now let me bring it down here. 4x squared minus 40x plus 64 is 0. So let me draw a game plan here. Solving an x squared with an equal sign. How do you do it? Well, step one is you should get a 0 on one side, but we've already got that. In some of the problems later on in this section, you'll need to do that for yourself, but they've already got that for us. Okay, so step two is you try to factor. And I say try to factor because they don't always factor, but they often do. So here's how we factor. So first off, if all the terms have a number in common, then factor it to the front. We call that the GCF, the greatest common factor. So I'm going to go GCF, one big old parenthesis equals 0. And then what goes inside, minus, plus, whatever multiplies correctly. Never multiplies correctly. So what am I talking about? Well, as you look at these three numbers, what divides into all those? What do they have in common? 4, right? The GCF is 4. 4 goes into 4, 4 goes into 40, 4 goes into 64. You can check it with your calculator. You can use calculators on the homework and tests and everything. So check it. So then what do? Well, you take out the 4, one big parenthesis, right? Notice, one big parenthesis, just one big parenthesis. You put the minus here and the plus there. And then you ask yourself, well, how do you know what goes inside? Whatever works. 4 times what will go back to 4x squared? Well, x squared, right? And 4 times what will go back to 40? You need 40x. You need 10x there, right? Because 4 times 10 is 40, and you got the x. And then 4 times what? Divide. Just take 64 and divide by 4 in your calculator. It'll tell you 16. 4 times 16 is 64. So that's step one. GCF in the front, one big parenthesis, whatever multiplies correctly. All right, let's go to part B. Next, for the x squared, x, no x part, meaning this part, we do the 2 parenthesis factoring. So the 4 just stays in the front. We're not changing him at all. And then we do the 2 parenthesis thing. X's go here. Remember how this works? You might be a little rusty on this. Let me help. You're looking for a number back here and a number back here that multiply to be this number at the back and add to be the number in the middle. What times what is 16? Well, 4 times 4, yeah, and 2 times 8. Well, how do you know which one you want? And 1 times 16. How do you know which one you want to use? Well, they got to add to be 10, so it's the 2 and the 8. You see? 2 and 8. And how are they going to make negative 10? Both are negative, aren't they? Right? Negative 2 and negative 8, they multiply to be positive, right? Because 2 negatives multiply to be positive 16. And the 2 negatives add to be negative 10. Right? If you lose $2 and lose $8, you lost $10. They add up to be negative 10, but they multiply to be positive 16. Those are our numbers. Remember all that? And then, finally, part C, set each part that has an x equal to 0 and solve. So I take this x minus 2 equal to 0, I'm going to solve it. Take this x minus 8 equal to 0, and I'm going to solve it. Well, what about that 4? Well, see what it says here? Each part that has an x. That 4 has no x with him. So skip him. Now, I don't want that to be just some rule that Mr. Heron or some other math teacher says, but I want you to see that that's true. That's logical. Why? Well, think about if I told you 4 times a number equals 0. Just think with me logic. If I said, hey, I've got 4 and I'm multiplying it by these 2 unknown numbers and the answer is coming out 0. What does that mean logically? Well, this number could be 0 or that number could be 0, right? One of those two has to be 0. That's how you're multiplying to be 0, right? Because you could take 4 times 0 times 3 and that would be 0. Or you could go 4 times 7 times 0, and that would come out 0, right? If either one of those numbers is 0, when you multiply the 4 and the two numbers, then the answer would come out 0. So if you're multiplying 4 and two unknowns, and the answer is 0, that means either the first unknown is 0 or the second unknown is 0. Doesn't mean anything about the 4, does it? That's what's going on here. Do you see it? It's 4, nothing unknown there. There's no x. So it's just 4 times an unknown. Why is this unknown? Because it has an x. I don't know what this is. If x is 10, then this is 10 minus 2, 8. If x is 6, then this is 6 minus 2, 4. I don't know. It's got an x. It's unknown. So we call those a variable. They vary. They're unknown. So we've got 4, which is known. We know for sure that's just 4. There's no x there. Just 4 times something we don't know times something we don't know is coming out 0. What does that mean logically? The first unknown could be 0 or the second unknown could be 0. One of those two guys has to be 0 to make them all three multiply to be 0, but it doesn't mean anything about the 4. The 4 doesn't make anybody 0. So that makes sense logically. Do you see why that's the case? So you just set the parts that have an x equals 0. They're the parts that vary. So then, and then you finish from there. You solve and solve. Add 2. Gonzo, x is 2. Add 8. And so x is 8. So our answers are 2 and 8. By the way, in some homework questions, you'll factor and you will have an x out there. If that was the case, I would have set that part equal to 0. Right? If he had an x, then I would have set him equal to 0, right? It's each part that has x. So then he would have been a variable. He could have varied. He could have been 0. And I would have finished solving by dividing by 4, right? Because that's multiply, we divide. And 0 over 4 is 0. 0 would have been an extra answer that's possible in that case. But that was not our case. We did not have a 0 out there. We did not have an x out there. So we have no x out there. So we skip him altogether. Only the parts that have an x, only those parts can vary and be different things and can make things multiply to be 0. The 4 can't do that. He's just a 4. So the answers are 2 and 8. That's how we do that problem.